Reading with your kids.
Hey, so great to see you. Come on in. Hi, my name is Jadley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted that you're part of our beautiful Reading with Your Kids family. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Audible, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is returning to the show. Luke Reynolds is here to celebrate even more fantastic failures. We've talked a lot on this show about how important it is for parents to let their kids fail, to let them experience a little bit of loss, disappointment, so that they can understand that they can pick themselves back up, learn resiliency, learn grit. You know, it's funny, when I do my educational magic shows and I take questions after performance, one of the things the kids often ask me is, have you ever made a mistake? And my answer is, I haven't done a show that I haven't made a mistake in. And if you didn't see the ones I made today, that's awesome. That's the way I planned it. It has been such a blessing for me to be able to perform for kids all over the country for the past 30 years. But of course now, thanks to COVID, performing in front of a group of 600, 700, 1,800 kids, it's just not possible right now. It's not safe. But thanks to technology, I am able to perform for kids all over the world through Zoom, through Google Hangouts, and whatever other kind of conferencing software a school might be using. And I would love to come into your community and to present my show, We Will Roar, Respect Others and Read. This is a really, really fun show that encourages kids to show everybody in their life the respect that they want people to give to them, and also reminds them of the importance to read every single day. Please visit my website, wewillroar.com. Find out all about it. And we are offering a limited number of schools an opportunity to book a free virtual performance of We Will Roar. Please hurry. Go to wewillroar.com. Joining us right now from the beautiful city of Beverly in Massachusetts. He's returning to the show to celebrate the sequel to his first book. The book we're going to be talking about today is Even More Fantastic Failures. Please welcome back to the show, Luke Reynolds. Luke, how are you?
Hey, Jed, doing well, and thanks for having me back on again.
I'm really excited to have you back. We had such a great time talking about fantastic failures. And I'm excited to talk about this because I think failure, as we talked about in the first meeting, is failure should be looked at as a wonderful opportunity to learn, I think.
Definitely. And I think the idea that we sort of make it something far more sacred, far more normal for our lives is really important. And I think the more we see it in other people, the more we accept it in ourselves.
Well, seeing failure in other people, that's pretty easy to do these days. There are a lot of folks who are making missteps. We'll just leave it at that in the news. Yeah. And certainly when it comes to COVID, with a lot, people with the best of intentions, we thought one thing, and then we learned, and we're learning, and we're growing, and so I think this is an important lesson for kids to learn, is that you shouldn't stop at your first failure or your third.
Yeah, that's huge, and I think I think you're right. The whole everything now we're learning with COVID and schools changing. When you think about the silver lining in all of this, is I think it's helping us to think, hey, what was education working before? Were schools working great before? Changing, like our elementary schools are now going to be outside more. Besides the horror of everything that's happening, it is a chance to sort of take that breath and say, wait, why are we doing what we're doing, and what really works? And when you look at the persistence of, scores, low test scores in certain communities, maybe the education system we've got there isn't quite effective. What can we do differently? So failure does give us that chance, like you're saying right now, to sort of reinvent the wheel a little bit, I think.
Yeah. You know that you you asked a really kind of a dangerous question. Were elementary schools working as best as they could? People get there are some questions that you can ask that really anger some folks, and I think that's one of them.
Yeah. And I think it's for all of us, I think when you look at sort of the Facebook culture, the Twitter culture, it's such we think of an iceberg. It's such a very tip of the iceberg culture where we're very used to communicating in images and very, very short ideas. And the reality is life is much more complex. And if we're willing to peel back the layers and, for me as a dad, if I'm willing to say, hey, what's working about my parenting and what's not, like, what am I doing wrong? And for me as a teacher, what's working in my classes, what's not. There's nothing inherently, it's vulnerable, but that's only going to make me better in the long run. So if we're willing to do that with government, with education, with everything in our lives to say, let's be honest, what's not working and how can we do it better? I think that's the way to hopefully create something even more powerful for us and students.
Yeah. I think when we spoke the last time, you had this, and I don't know if analogy is the right word, talking about scars and learning from our scars. Do you remember that? Yes. I love to think of, when I'm working on another sort of idea called scar stories. When we think about, we tend to hide scars. And as I'm researching, I'm finding there are these incredible people who talk about the need to embrace scars and look at them. And what have they taught us? What have we learned from scars? Even when they're traumatic, sometimes that lesson comes as empowerment. This scar is a reminder of what I've been through, and they couldn't stop me. This person who did this to me. Or sometimes it's accidental, and we've hopefully learned to do things differently. But our scars, Angelina Jolie actually has a really neat interview out where she talks about scars being one way that she has learned to grow into her own sense of self. So I think scars can also be a powerful way we learn to come into our own power if we don't give into the shame of them. Was this idea of embracing and learning from our scar stories, is this something totally new, or is it something that human beings kind of embraced in the past and we kind of moved away from it?
Man, that's a great question. I think, my sense is that it's even before social media came along. It seems like if we look through a lot of, cultures, a lot of historical periods, we've always tried to sort of repress certain things. And we've thought, hey, this is, it's not okay to talk about this. It's not okay to talk about, I feel jealous, or I feel betrayed, or I feel scared. We could look at masculinity and fear and the relationship of masculinity and fear. And a lot of young boys I had in my 7th grade classrooms, they would feel immense fear, but it masked as anger or aggression because it wasn't sort of culturally acceptable for a 7th grade boy to say, I'm really scared. I'm really scared to go home. I'm really scared that I'm not good enough. So I think there's been a consistent theme of sort of repression and wanting to hide or not deal with tough emotions or scars. And I think the more we do talk about these things and say, look, like one of the activities I did with my 7th graders, which I loved, was called the scar stories. And everyone would share a story about a scar, and it was anything they wanted. Didn't have to be obviously something super private, but it was a chance to say, look, we are all in this class. We have all been through this thing called life up to 7th grade. We have scars, and it's okay for us to share where they came from and how they play into who we are. And it's a bonding experience and hopefully something that reduces shame. But I think shame is just, I think we tend to use shame in our culture as a motivating tool, but it wears away. It loses its impact and,
It really does. And this idea of saving face and, not admitting that we made mistakes, it's caused a lot of grief throughout history. Grief is not the word. It's been the cause for wars to break out. And even now, a lot of the conflict that we have with different countries around the world stems from the fact that, there's some cultures where that saving face is so very important.
Yeah, that's huge. That's so huge. And I think and a lot of the figures that we look up to, it always is interesting to me how it comes as a shock. You'll see this news article, this famous person, had a meltdown, and it's sort of like, whoa, how could they have a meltdown? How could they, go through an ugly divorce? How could they, do this terrible thing? And if we peel back the layers, it's that, we're all like that. We've all made these mistakes and had these problems. But I think you're absolutely right. A lot of horrible things happen because we try to pretend that that's not real. And we try to save face, in effect, causing even greater problems. Whereas I think, it wasn't me who said it, but I forget. One great writer said, a lot of the world's problems could be solved if people could just get honest about how they feel. They wouldn't resort to all these other things. I loved watching, the Tom Hanks version of Won't You Be My Neighbor, about the Fred Rogers life story. And I mean, I just wept during that because it was such a powerful incantation of, here's a guy whose message was simple, like, we got to be real. We got to be real with how we feel. And there's courage involved in that. And I think that would save a lot of danger and a lot of sad happenstances.
Yeah. Now, I definitely want to talk about some of the people we're going to meet and even more fantastic failures. But before we do, you've gone from teaching middle school, now you're teaching at a college. One of the things that I'm hearing about is, you and I were talking about celebrating our scars and being open and embracing our failures. But I'm hearing that, like, on a lot of college campuses, if you say the wrong thing or you say it the wrong way, that one mistake I think the word is cancel, can get you canceled. That, the folks are losing their jobs over a misspoken word or a phrase that was deemed to be hurtful, and it wasn't meant to be hurtful. What about that? Are we becoming less able to embrace our scars in some ways?
That's a great question. I think it's really interesting because at the same time as we're thinking through being honest and open about what we think, what we feel, what we're dealing with, on the other hand, this whole historical movement for justice is happening. And I think sometimes those things tend to collide. And I think the college campus is a really fascinating place where that happens. And I think the difference I sort of in my own head and heart make is, am I being honest about other people or am I being honest about myself? In other words, I ask myself, is my vulnerability about me and my growth, my sort of life trajectory, my scars, or am I trying to judge someone else's scars and judge, how someone else should feel? And it seems like we get into trouble when we start to say, hey, this person should feel this way, or sort of make those judgments about others rather than ourselves. And even the students I work with who are going to be teachers, and I try to ground them really, hopefully, thoughtfully in the idea that, look, you have to be able to think about your personal experiences, reflect critically and openly on what you've been through and why that made you the way you are. But to try to refrain from judgment on saying, Jed, his journey is this, therefore he must be like this, or any student we have in class. And that's tricky because what we deal with on the college campus and hopefully the openness of ideas, when a kid gets to teach high school or middle school, those students are going to say all kinds of wild things. And how do you feel that as a teacher, and how do you navigate that balance of encouraging openness but also preventing judgments against other students? And so you raised a great point.
That is just another example of how difficult it is to be a teacher, and how we really have to value teaching much more in our society.
Yes, yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So, getting back to even more fantastic failures, who was your favorite failure that you're bringing to life in this book?
Oh, great question. I think probably just with all of the news about Chadwick Boseman passing and his story and his incredible life, Ryan Coogler is in the book, and he's the director of the Black Panther film. But his story was so inspiring for me, and it sort of brought back to mind with Chadwick's passing. But Ryan Coogler is a guy who, loved football, wanted to be a football player, was really was really into football. And then sometimes our failures come not in, we fail at something and then we keep trying. So we've heard the story and we see it in films a lot where a kid wants to be a great basketball player or ballerina or chess champion or football player, and they fail, but they keep trying and they eventually make it, right? So that sort of motif, like you just keep trying at a sport, you don't make the team, but you practice and then you make it. Ryan Coogler's sort of failure is a very different one. He loved football, was really into it. It wasn't quite working out and he was having some challenges. And then it was almost like sometimes failure sends us a different direction. And he had a teacher who really encouraged him to write and to think about writing and film. And so he got into writing movies and shooting his own movies and just found out that he had a deep passion for it. And then he went on to create some really incredible movies. He directed the new Creed with Michael Jordan and Sylvester Stallone, which got some really cool reviews, sort of the next stage of the Rocky movies, and then directed Black Panther and just had some really interesting success that you wonder, say his football career had taken off. Maybe we wouldn't have Black Panther the way we do or Creed. And so that's kind of I like his story because it shows that failure isn't always about just, keep pushing through and just become a great football player or, chess player or whatever. It's sometimes about, hey, maybe this is sending me a different direction that I could find something else I love. So Ryan Coogler's story is kind of cool for me.
Yeah, and boy, what a great movie, Black Panther. I am not a superhero movie fan at all, but my niece took me to that movie and I loved it. It was phenomenal.
That's awesome. I agree. I thought it was great. Yeah.
So what was the story that most surprised you in the book?
Oh, great question. I think the one that most surprised me was, I never knew this until I heard the interview Barack Obama did with David Axelrod on his podcast. But he talks about, at the Democratic National Convention, back in, I believe it was 2004, he couldn't even get in the doors. So here, and he had been a state senator, in Illinois, and he had just lost a crushing election, and he wanted to he believed, he was meant to be in politics and be a leader, but he suffered a crushing defeat. And then his wife, Michelle, had encouraged him to go to the DNC just to kind of get re-inspired. And he couldn't even get in the door. He was, they didn't let him in. And there's a great story he tells in the podcast where Obama says, his credit card was so maxed out at the car rental place when he flew into California, they weren't even letting him rent a car. So it's just this great image of someone now we look back at as a past president, not even being able to rent a car, struggling to use his credit card to rent a car. The doors being barred. He talks about, in the interview, walking around this large convention hallway, but not even being able to get onto the convention floor. And then years later, here he is up at, the podium. Actually, it's the 2000 convention. And then years later, here he is giving a huge keynote address. And then 4 years later, becoming president of the United States. So that was a very cool story to think, in years wise, how quickly things can change from becoming, we're sort of see these doors to our dreams barred. We can't get in, and then we're the ones on stage and other people. And I think it's one of those cool stories where life sometimes feels very short, and then in other times it can feel long. Like the story's not over. That's one chapter where Obama's in the hallway, the doors are locked and he can't get in, he doesn't have the pass. That's one chapter. It's not the end of the book. And so sometimes when I talk with students, I like to use that analogy as well to think about, well, maybe this failure is a chapter. Like, yes, it's the end of the chapter. It's hard. It stinks. It's not fun, but it's not the end of the novel. Like, you can write a new chapter and who knows where that will take you next.
How do you think, other than just sharing these kind of stories, how do you think parents can help their middle school kids, because that is such a difficult age, understand that this is just a chapter and what we hope is going to be a long life? Yes, you're in the 7th grade right now. You're 13, 14 years old. it seems like a long time. You seem like you've lived a full life, but dude, you got a long way to go.
Yeah, I think, well, honestly, what you said, I think that's it. Exactly that mantra. And I think like I have 4 boys, and my oldest is now almost 12. So he's just hitting those sort of middle school years. And everything feels so, to the middle school kid, everything feels like this moment is it. This is my whole life is about this moment. And the more we can sort of help them say, no, it's not. It feels like it. It feels like this moment is truth, and this will define you forever, but it will not. And I think one of the best ways is, and I think this maybe because I'm a writer, but also because I see the effect on my kids and middle school students and college students I work with. The more we share about our journeys, it helps them see, and I'll never forget when my almost 12-year-old, way back when he was 5 or 6, and he had done something wrong. I forget what it was, but he lied, or he broke something and lied about it. And I said, that's not okay. You can't do it. You got to be on, giving the whole dad talk. And then he looked at me and he said, Dad, have you ever done anything wrong? And it was a cool question, because it was almost like you could tell he was trying to turn this moment into, man, I messed up. Have you ever messed up? And then I started talking about mistakes, and you could see his face kind of turn from like, man, I'm such a, I did something so wrong, the shame, to, oh, you did a lot of wrong stuff too. I guess we all do wrong things. And for me as a dad and a teacher, that was a powerful moment. And I've tried to do that as a parent and a dad, is to talk about my journey and talk about, hey, I thought I was going to love this job, and turned out I really did not like it at all. And then I knew I wanted to do that. So I think, the more parents can talk realistically and openly about us as middle schoolers, high schoolers, how we figured things out, mistakes we made, I think that helps our kids a lot. And I think what we do, because that also is really vulnerable and intimate. And so what we do instead is we tend to, and I fall into this trap, we tend to kind of lecture, like life gets busy. It's like, don't do that. Don't go out with those people. Just don't. Okay. Just like stop. I don't want to see that person at my house again. Instead of saying, look, when I was in high school, I had this friend. I thought it was going to be, here's what they did. I think it's a far more invitational way to teach our kids, rather than the lecture, which is easier, but long run I don't think it really does much,
Absolutely. It doesn't do a thing. And it's, I love the idea of, that you're encouraging parents to climb down off that pedestal, that we all think that we need to be on. We all need to maintain this facade that we're perfect. Our kids look up to us, and that's cool, but it's also daunting. And gee, if I let my kids know that I've made a mistake, that I don't know everything, they're not going to respect me. Well, actually, the opposite is true. I think they're going to have even more respect for you.
Yeah, well said. Well said.
Before we go, what inspired you to look into failure and to really celebrate it with your books?
Yeah, great question. I think I essentially, it was when I was teaching 7th grade, and I just saw this culture in this class I had, where they wanted to do everything right. They wanted to look right, have the right, popularity, get the right grades, have the right clothes. It was almost like, I just felt like I would talk to my students, and I wanted to say, you're missing life. Like you're trying to get it all right and do it right. And that's not necessarily bad to strive to do things well. But when it becomes your whole focus, essentially, never make a mistake, never do anything wrong, always have the right friends, be in the right group, you're losing some deeper meaning of life. And so I just started with that class. I'd start researching people, and just telling at the start of class, I'd have a brief PowerPoint, and I'd say, today, we're talking about Albert Einstein and how he threw a piano stool at his teacher when he was young, and he had severe anger problems. And they, just kind of like humanizing figures that you see posters of with their best quotes. And those posters are always the highlights. And we think like, oh, this sage person, they were always just, when they spoke, gems were falling from their mouths. And it's like, no, these people were sometimes mean. They had problems. They were afraid. They made mistakes. And so I tried to tell these stories as a way of helping students strive for something deeper than being right.
Yeah. Now, does that particular class understand that they helped light a fire in you that's inspired you to create these two great books?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so, because by the end of, it was actually partly their idea. By the end of that year, a couple of the students in class, they know I like to write, and I'd written some other stuff, and they were like, Mr. Reynolds, you should put all these stories together and make them into a book. And so partly I said, that's a great idea. And so the seed of the idea was kind of put there by them. And so I let them know, like, I really appreciate that you liked hearing these stories and that you think maybe other people would too.
Awesome. Now, before we ask you where folks can find you online, now don't tell us the story, but what's the one failure that we'll find in Even More Fantastic Failures that we absolutely do not want to miss?
Oh, great question. All right. I will say one that you absolutely do not want to miss. You know what? I think I would go with Nick Foles.
Nick Foles. Okay.
Nick Foles.
Okay. There's a teaser. Where can we go online to learn more about Luke Reynolds and learn more about Even More Fantastic Failures?
So you can go to www.lukewreynolds.com.
Awesome. We've had a great time celebrating failures and celebrating the release of Even More Fantastic Failures with the author Luke Reynolds. Luke, thanks so much for being back on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Jed. I really appreciate the time.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Dr. Catherine Garforth. She is here to help us acknowledge Dyslexia Awareness Month and give us some insights into this challenge that so many kids face, and a challenge that so many people do not understand. That's the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. If you are the author of a fantastic children's book, we would love to help you let the world know all about it. Our Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read program has helped authors for the past couple of years help their books stand out from the crowd of books that are published every single month. You can learn more about this great program by going to our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the Authors Click Here button at the top of the page and then scroll down to the Certified Great Reads application. We're especially excited because we took a program that was really strong and has really helped a lot of authors, and we made it even better. So check it out today, the Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read program. Hey, I want to take a moment to thank all the folks who made today's show so very, very wonderful. Of course, I want to thank Luke Reynolds. Be sure to check out Even More Fantastic Failures. Also want to thank my incredible team. My daughter, Alejandra Doherty, doing so much to rebuild the show, rebrand the show, update the show. I am so excited. I also want to thank my producer, Fatima Khan. I want to thank my awesome author, Ambassador Peggy Cotto. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. But most of all, I want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Thank you so much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.